We live now? Okay. Hello and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Disability Dialogue with Aisha Seedat. Sorry, my voice went a bit cracky there. We're live on DAF Station 9. We are live on Facebook and YouTube if you'd like to see our faces. You're listening to your host Aisha Seedat for an hour. Welcome to my very own show, Disability Dialogue. Today you're joining in with the second segment, and on the last segment you heard from Dr. Lucy Mackay from Medics for Rare Diseases. If you missed it, you can catch up via Facebook or YouTube. Today I'm joined with a very special guest who I'll get around to introducing quite soon. Those of you who missed out on the last show, I'll explain about myself and what I do. So I'm Aisha Seedat. You may have heard me on Radio Ramadan this year and last year with our amazing host Irfan from his drive time shows, or you may see me zooming around the hearts of Leicester City. Sorry, I'm just too speedy for you. I have a rare disease myself called Morquez syndrome. I'm a rare disease disability advocate and a guest speaker of the Montfort University. And I'm very, very honoured to have a very special guest on with me today, a dear friend and colleague. But before that, let me explain what Disability Dialogues is. It refers to conversation or discussion focused on disability-related topics, involves engaging in an open and inclusive about disability, explores different perspectives and promotes understanding and awareness. Disability Dialogue aims to break down barriers and challenges, misconceptions surrounding disabilities. They provide opportunities for individuals with disabilities, their families, advocates, experts, and the wider community to share their experiences, insights, and knowledge by facilitating open and respectful conversations. These dialogues contribute to building a more inclusive society where individuals with disabilities can fully participate and thrive. So what is disability? You have a physical or mental impairment. That impairment has to be substantial and long-term adverse effect on your ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. They can be seen and unseen. You heard from Dr. Lucy Mackay the other week. We spoke about rare diseases where they can be both seen and unseen. Today we are talking about Down syndrome, which is mainly a visible illness. So I'll just remind you, our show won't be taking any calls, but I encourage you to text in on 077 488 5505. Keep your texts coming in. I'll start off by introducing my guest. So, hi, welcome Julian to Radio Ramadan FM with Disability Dialogues with myself. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's a great pleasure to be with you, Aisha. Yeah.
So I know Julian as a friend and colleague. We've both worked together through Montfort University and other external projects. So I've known him over time, and it's a great honour to have him on today. So, Julian, would you like to tell us more about yourself?
Wow, how to follow that, Aisha? Yeah, I'm Julian Harris, and I do lots of things. I'm an equality and diversity consultant now, but I've worked in lots of domains. And I guess the connection with disability is because I have a long-term disability. I've been mentally ill all my life, from as long as I can remember, going back to childhood with depression, with OCD, with anxiety disorder. I found out recently I'm also autistic. So these are very, very late diagnoses because I'm 54 years old now. But I do lots of stuff as, we've done some stuff together at De Montfort University, and it's really good that I'm able to do lots of stuff that is about lived experience of particularly of mental illness and autism. But of course, my disability connections, I'll also go through Danny, my brother, my late brother, who had Down syndrome, and this is an area of my life I'm quite accustomed to talking about mental illness. I'm not so accustomed to talking about Danny, his life and his death. So this is going to be a bit of a new thing for me, but I can't think of anyone better to do it with. So lovely to be with you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Julian, for taking time out on a Sunday and talking to me, as well as our viewers, about such a raw subject about your late brother and his journey with Down syndrome, not only his, but yours as a family as well, as a brother, and
Yes.
anyone else in your family. So to start off with our first question, would you like to explain to our viewers, what is Down syndrome and how did it affect Danny?
Well, Down syndrome is a learning disability. It exists because there is an extra chromosome 21. That's how genetically, biologically, Down syndrome people exist, I guess. But the big thing I think with Down syndrome is the connections to other areas of disability as well. So Danny, for example, had a heart and lung defect. Many people with Down syndrome have other physical health disabilities. But there was an article the other day that I picked up on that talked about very positive things with Down syndrome people, talked about their creativity, their artistic expression, their determination, their empathy, their compassion, their love for music, their smiling faces, their characters. All of these things are very, very positive aspects, but all partly connected. Obviously, connected to disability, but also character traits as well. And Danny had all these things in abundance. Really, he was the nearest person I think I've ever known to someone that I could say was almost perfect. He wasn't perfect. Nobody is, but I look back at him now, and he died in 1996, so it's a long time ago. But I look back at him and recognize all those traits. And he had a gift to connect people, and he was a gift from God, I always like to think. So yes, and all those things I guess connect with Down syndrome. But you know, it is a debilitating disease. I think in every 1,000 people there'll be one person with Down syndrome. So that is quite prevalent across the world.
Well, that's amazing to hear about Danny, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Danny, but if I did, I think I could relate to him in some sense, especially with what about Julian's gonna say. So just a reminder, you're listening to Aisha Seedat on Ramadan FM and my special guest Julian Harrison. If you'd like to text in, please do so on 077 488 5505. Please text in your thoughts, feedback, or if you know of someone with Down syndrome or you've cared for someone with Down syndrome, please do text in. Do share with us some of your experiences. We'd like to know. So with Down syndrome, there are some physical and cognitive characteristics of Down syndrome. So please let our viewers know what are some of the physical and cognitive characteristics of Danny in particular.
Yeah, well, I think one of there's a visual aspect to Down syndrome, which there's no polite way of putting this, but sometimes it's quite a flat face. I think I think it's how it's described. Mongol, and Mongol was a phrase that has, thank God, doesn't exist now in terms of that links with Down syndrome, but it comes about because of eye features and how you actually look. But Danny also had a heart and lung problem. Lots of Down syndrome people are quite physically quite robust. They're quite, and how you'd say this, chunky. I would say Danny was chunky. He was marvelous to cuddle. He gave the best cuddles that you could ever give. But the thing that sort of defined Danny's death was the fact that he had a heart and lung transplant. He had a heart and lung condition. And when we tried to get that addressed, when Danny was about 10 years old, Uh, we were told by an eminent surgeon that, and his words were, "You won't find anyone in the country who will perform an operation on someone like this." So, in other words, Down syndrome people were denied the heart and lung transplant that potentially would have saved their lives. And that's a thing that has stayed with me. It's a thing that's persisted a long time. The first winner of Big Brother, this is going back a bit, Craig Phillips, he donated his money to his friend, I think his friend was called Joe, to enable them to have a heart transplant, because on the NHS,
Mm.
Danny's life was considered not to be sufficient quality to warrant having a transplant of that kind. So that just shows, I guess, some of the innate discrimination and prejudice that has conditioned Down syndrome people growing up, and that's what cost Danny his life at the end of the day. So yeah, it's hard to talk about. Luckily, things are changing, but it didn't come soon enough, unfortunately, for our Danny.
It's quite interesting to know. Um, I know of, I knew of, you know, of people once growing up who had Down syndrome, and the lovely character that was so cuddly, you know, and they're very joyful. Like you can't tell what
Absolutely.
they're going through.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely, you know, a pleasure getting to know them.
Well, Danny always had this connection with people. He could connect people,
Mm.
whether it was hugs,
Mhm.
whether it was kisses. He gave really sloppy kisses, but he was so enthusiastic about being around people. He loved dancing. He loved music. He loved playing his drums. He loved singing. He wasn't a great singer, but he just loved it. He had a real capacity for living, which obviously makes the fact that he was denied that opportunity even more tragic, really.
Mhm. No, that's good. And to dive a bit more deeper into the life of Danny, what was life like for Danny?
Um, I think life was relatively good. I think growing up with Down syndrome in the 1970s, Danny was born in 1970. It's a very different climate from what it is now. Um, when we first knew that Danny had Down syndrome, there was lots of people, including within our family, that was said, well, he'll obviously have to be put away in a home, in an institution, and that was the predominant thinking. My dad, I can remember, he was very well. I can't remember. I was very young at the time, but he told me that he spent, when he knew that Danny had Down syndrome, he spent a lot of time walking through the streets in Liverpool where Danny was born, thinking of ways of how actually he could kill him, how he would work to contrive an accident, because Down syndrome was seen as being this awful affliction that on a family. And luckily, Danny, as soon as my dad saw Danny and said he realised who Danny was, there was no chance of that ever happening. But it was tough. We're talking about segregated schooling. We're talking about Danny having to go in and having social workers at a very early age. We're talking about schooling that wasn't really schooling. I have a report from his headmistress of his primary school that said Down syndrome people will never read or write. They'll never read or write. So what we have to do is keep them occupied. Literally words to that effect. So my mum, being a primary school teacher, she taught him to read and write. And Danny read. He wrote his diaries every day. He read books. He had a mental age of about 10 or 11 when he was in his 20s. So there was a lot of talk of Daniel being confined in institutions, in homes, and so on, and lots of talk about how we would cope as a family with the prospect of being someone up with Down syndrome. So you look back at it now and you think it was a totally different age, and it wasn't a nice time to bring up a Down syndrome person. As a brother, that used to that got me into a bit of trouble at times, because I would sort of intervene if anyone was picking on Danny, I would intervene. So I got into fights, I got into scraps, I got into arguments because I was defending him. A lot of protection to him, a lot of care and consideration to him, because people did treat him or could treat him really badly, and saw his disability as a sort of belittling type of experience, which of course it actually wasn't. It was totally the opposite.
Yeah, I can imagine so like back in the days how disability was not so seen, accepted. But we
Absolutely.
try our best as a family to, shape that, to try and amplify voice, and that's how I've started off disability dialogues, as it still is a bit unsteady, but hopefully giving the voices to the people with disabilities, to amplify a voice to help them, seek the justice that they need to help them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I can remember being told, Aisha, was that when we were very early in Danny's life, we were contemplating emigrating to Australia. I think I think probably in my parents' thoughts, there was the environment was very punitive towards people with Down syndrome, towards people with disabilities, full stop, I think. And going to Australia, starting a new life, starting afresh in a different part of the world and so forth was quite appealing. And they applied to Australia House, and the reply we got back from them was refusing our visa status on the lines that, and the words were, "We do not let subhuman beings into our country," and that stayed with me, has always stayed with me. And again, it was a reflection of the fact that not just in this country, but obviously in other places around the world, there was this attitudinal, not just disrespect, but downright prejudice, almost genocidal prejudice at times towards people with Down syndrome. So yes, it's very different now, but it's worth remembering where we were back in the 1970s, I guess.
And that you've heard from Julian talking about brother Danny. Please do text in on 077 488 5505 05. If you have got someone in your family with Down syndrome, or anyone that you know, please do text in. What are your experiences like now? Would like to know how it is now from what it was back in the days. We've got a text that's just come in. Hi to Julian, whom I've had a pleasure of knowing through Aisha. Thank you for sharing the insight into Down syndrome and the changes over time with these affected by this condition. Thank you for also sharing your lived experience through your brother Danny, so it's someone we both know.
That's nice.
So, as you have already mentioned, Danny faced a lot of changes in society with his condition. But talking about yourself as a brother, what challenges did you face as a brother and as a family?
Well, it's one of the interesting things, Aisha, was that when Danny was born, my parents were told that one of the impacts of having Danny would either be that my parents' marriage would fail, or that one or both of them would have severe health problems. Of course, the thought at the time was that this was just simply a parental thing. It didn't really relate to me as a brother, but actually, I've always wondered whether the seeds of my own mental illnesses were in the pressure and demands of being a brother to Danny at a very early age. And I was older than Danny. I was the oldest. There were three of us brothers. Simon was my youngest brother. And because I was the oldest, when Danny came into the world, he got a lot of attention from my parents. I was rather left to. I was taught to be strong, I guess, or encouraged to be strong. Almost as if that I would have to fend for myself a lot of the time because of the attention on Danny. And I guess it never really struck me at the time there's to be anything different. Danny was different in this sort of sense. He needed a lot of attention. He needed a lot of help. He needed a lot of support. lots of attention went on to him. I just struggled on, and I guess as a brother, when I lost my dad when when I was 18. So I sort of became a care. I'd always been a carer towards my brother. I'd always done things that brothers, I guess brothers ordinarily didn't do with regard to Danny. So I would cook for him, I'd look after him, I'd make sure he was washed, I'd make sure he had the right clothes, I cut his hair. I did all these sorts of things. Towards the end of his life, I would have to clean up from him when he was unable to go to the toilet, and all these things were sort of, I just assume them. They just that goes part and parcel with the job, and I suspect, as I said, that part of the seeds of my own mental illness were sort of sown, if you like, with the pressure of being a young carer and being a sibling carer. Um, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. I had 25 years of life with Danny. He's been an immense gift to my ongoing life as well. But I know, yeah, it had an impact. It really did have a big impact on me.
It's interesting to know that someone with a disability myself, my sister being my carer for me, but then she doesn't class herself as carer. She just does a
No,
duty, just as a sister would, like going out. Like mentioned other duties, like even combing my hair, putting lipstick on me when I'm, going out the house. So we have that bond as a sister, a friend. But if she speaks to someone just about being a young carer on an odd day, they think, oh, she's cares for her sister, but it's not
absolutely, yeah,
actually that.
yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I'm caring my sister because I'm always like telling her what to do and not to do.
And I think that's a good. It's a great point because
Yeah,
siblings are often not seen as carers, or not the first type of person that a carer is, and for many of us, there was never an option that I would be a carer. It was just that just came with the territory, and you got on with it. But I do know, having to take I went to parents' evenings with him when he was very young. I would be teaching him as well how to read and stuff, right? I would make sure that physically he was able to play with us when we were little children. And as I said before, that sometimes if he was picked on, it meant that I got into trouble because I would stand up for him. And so, yeah, you sort of you took on these roles, if you like, without really thinking about it. It just came with the territory, and I think that's it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, I guess. You don't always realize that you need support as a carer. And I would never have classed myself as a carer at that age. Now looking back, I know that I was, and I could have done with some support, I guess. At lots of times when Danny was alive.
exactly. Where our viewers, come on, text in. It's 077 488 5505. Do text in any questions you have for Julian as a carer, or even about his brother's life. Anything you would like to ask Julian, please do text in, or just message us to text in you're listening in and how you know Julian, myself, or both of us. I think we have a lot of mutual friends, connections that are listening in today. So, why have you waited until now to start talking about Danny?
That is a great question. I think it's probably because I've often realised and I've wanted to share some of the things I've already shared on this program with people, but have felt unable to do so. It's one of those perverse sort of things that I can talk very, very frankly about feeling suicidal and all the things that come with my own disability, but actually talking about how disability related to my brother, it has been immensely difficult. There's lots of things, for example, I've not been able to do since Danny died. I've not been able to watch The Wizard of Oz, for example. Danny loved musicals. He would listen to musicals to his heart's content. He loved all those old films. I've never been able to watch it since. I cannot watch it. It's just too much of a thing for me to get through. And I think I've probably reached the time of life. My mum's now in her 80s, and has, as my mum's already always had a heart condition. So I'm not going to have her for much longer. Hopefully more than I want, more than I think I'm going to have her. But she, she's in her 80s, and she's often talked about the need for Danny's story to come out, and I'm now starting the process of coming to terms with what happened, but also to write a book based on Danny's life that would be half a sort of biography of Danny, but also a half a tale of discrimination, prejudice um, towards people with Down syndrome, and the legacy of that. Um, and I've started to think about that. I've talked with a few people, including our good friend John Costa, about how I might plan that and do that. But part of that parcel has been for me to start to come out and start to talk about Danny. I have a Facebook page now called Danny's Legacy: Living with Down Syndrome, that I launched either, I think it was early this year or the end of last year. So it's fairly fresh. And I've started to put some stories about Down syndrome people on there, as well as pictures of Danny and so on. So it's starting to come out. But I can tell you now, it is a far harder process this than ever I've ever experienced talking about the really bad issues to do with mental health. This is more difficult than talking about times when I've been suicidal, for example. So yes, there's a lot of soul searching to do. There's a lot of trying to find the right situation to talk about it. There's a lot of investigation to do about how prevalent the sort of things that happened to Danny were across the world. I know they were prevalent. I've talked about the issue of heart transplants, for example, in relation to Craig Phillips and Big Brother. But I want to find out, how have historically, how have even while Danny was alive, how have Down syndrome people been treated? How have they been um, left to die in lots of cases? Danny was condemned to die when that surgeon said they would refuse to do a heart-lung transplant on someone of this kind. Those were the words that were used, and you think, wow, you will not consider doing a heart transplant on someone with Down syndrome because you have assessed that he doesn't have enough quality of life. That was the reason. And you're thinking, okay, that was the 1980s, but how prevalent was that? How many people died as a result of not having that particular operation? And it's a story that has not properly been told, I think. And I think, I'm not saying I'm the person to tell it. I can only tell it as I see it, but I think it's a story that's long overdue. And as far as disability concerns, we need to hear these stories. Things are a lot different now. Well, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about that. But we need to know, for those people with Down syndrome that are living their lives now and living very full lives now, and their families and so forth. I think people need to know what it was like 30, 40, 50 years ago in this country. And I think that story, as I say, needs to come out, and I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm able to do that.
Okay. Julian, would you like to tell our viewers what your Facebook page is called so they can join the
Yeah,
like to?
yeah, it's called Our Danny's Legacy: Living with Down Syndrome. Yeah, it's quite prominent on Facebook. There's my favourite picture I've put on it. There's a picture of me and Danny on a little scooter. I must have been about 3. Danny was sort of, he's still in his baby clothes, bless him. And that is my sort of favourite image of me and my brother playing at a very young age. So that's on the front of it. But yeah, I'd be really pleased if people want to come on and join the page, like the page, and join the group. and so on, so that I can get to tell more people about Danny, but also to share lots of really positive stories about how people with Down syndrome live their lives now.
Okay, so our tech team have got the Facebook group link, so they'll put it on the Facebook chat and YouTube chat if those ones
Beautiful.
right, so they can check it. Got a couple of texts in. Hi to you, Aisha and Julian. Julian, listening to you and your experience with Down syndrome has overwhelmed me, especially when your family were thinking of moving to Australia and how the authorities labelled him. Second one is from my sister Sophia. So I do know she's listening. Hi, Julian and Aisha. Thank you to Julian for sharing your lived experience as a sibling. As a sibling myself, I understand and relate to your emotions and the impact of being a young carer. Your story is truly inspiring. I commend you for taking responsibility while recognizing that having caring support is vital, ensuring you are not in the shadows. Thank you, Sophia.
That's really nice. Thank you.
Julian, as a someone who had been a carer, do you have any advice for, siblings like my sister here or anyone else who's
I think my mate, I can give no advice to carers in how they care, because I think carers naturally are wonderful people in terms of how they care for other people. I think my strong advice is to not neglect your own needs, and that when you're struggling, as you will struggle. I struggled so often with Danny, and the demands of Danny, not his demands, but the demands of actually the situation. And I never sought help when I was young. It was never offered to me either, mind you. But I think for these days, anyone who's in a caring situation, you've got to look after yourself as well. So look about your own needs. Don't neglect them. Have time off for yourself at times when you can do so, and so forth. Enjoy things as much as you can, all that sort of stuff. Don't neglect your own mental health in particular, but also the other demands that come with caring. Enjoy caring. Caring is it's a beautiful thing to do. It's a beautiful thing to have, but that doesn't mean it's always easy. It's definitely not easy to be a carer. And at times you will feel, certainly I felt at times, sometimes even resentful of the fact that I was in this particular situation. I never felt resentful of Danny. I just felt resentful of the context, really. Why do I have to think about this? Why do I do have to do this? Why am I getting into trouble because I'm got his back up, and I'm trying to keep protect him and so forth. So yeah, I just think you've got to focus on your own needs as well and not neglect them. That would be my strong advice.
Thank you for that, Julian. Um, so recently, quite a lot that's been in the media of, people with Down syndrome, the attitude of people changing, for example, dolls with different needs and Down syndrome especially coming into play. And
Mm,
also actors with different needs now, just
absolutely.
Down syndrome, being portrayed in television and film. What impact has this had on you?
Oh, it's been so good to see. We've got Oscar winners with Down syndrome. Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome has won an Oscar. How fantastic is that? We have people with Down syndrome who are models. We have Down syndrome who are sports stuff. Down syndrome people do anything. They literally can do anything. And whenever you see these things, and whenever you sort of, I try and put them on the Facebook page as often as I can. My thoughts always go back to that head mistress that says, "Well, Down syndrome people can't read all right.
Mhm.
We just got to keep them occupied." And part of that for Danny would be, the frustration at times of being put in a great big workshop alongside 20 other people with Down syndrome to do very menial tasks in terms of building uh, rugs, chairs, all that sort of thing. Now, Danny was highly functional. Danny could read all right. He wrote his own diaries, as I said. And to see the limitations, I guess, of the life of lots of people with Down syndrome then, and now that seems to go away. We've got a Barbie doll coming into operation that has Down syndrome. So, Barbie's the big thing at the moment, isn't it? We've got a Barbie film and so forth. We're going to have a Barbie, a Down syndrome Barbie. How great is that? We see people in the Special Olympics, Down syndrome people achieving in sport. It's just wonderful to see Down syndrome models. How beautiful are these people? And the notion that, well, you can't have Down syndrome model because they look different or they're thinking, what nonsense, is this? Who defines what beauty is? It's all those sorts of things. So I think Danny would look at this and be so pleased. I can remember, for example, Danny, my mum was asked to do this was at Christmas time. This was towards the end of Danny's life, and she wanted a reader to read a Christmas lesson. And she wanted one of us to do it, and I didn't want to do it. My Simon, my brother, didn't want it. Danny up there like a shot, and he would read this thing. He would go through it all. He'd practice. He was made for this sort of stuff. As a musician, he could have excelled as a musician. His singing was very monotone, I have to say, but his sense of rhythm,
Yeah.
amazing sense of rhythm. So all those things that Danny could do, of course, it was always slightly hampered by his heart and lung condition. He had a hole in the heart. And often, for example, at family weddings, Danny would go over the top a little bit, and he would have to be treated by a doctor afterwards because he was out of breath, and so on and so forth. But when you see everything that Down syndrome people can do and are being encouraged to do, and being forthright in their attitudes, I think that is just so amazing, and it just shows all those people that condemned Danny to an early death. I look back at it now, and I hope you're watching this, and I hope you can see the achievements of people, because they're the same as any other people's achievements, and it is really good to see.
Yeah, I'm sure Danny would be very proud to see all this and see how far we've come. And I'm sure he'd be so
Absolutely.
over the moon. I am myself and other people as well. So it's amazing. We've only got Julian for a few more minutes. So please, if you do have any questions for Julian about his brother, please do text in. It's on 077 488 5505. We've got feedback from the show. If you know Julian, where do you know him from? Or if you know me. That's great. So going that because we're coming to the nearly the end, are there any particular myths or misconceptions? Sorry, I'm losing my words. Right. About Down syndrome that you'd like to address?
Well, I think probably the big myth and misconception is that Down syndrome people can't achieve what everyone else can achieve. All the big list of things that we've just gone through, and Danny's life itself, has proved that absolutely that's nonsense. That doesn't mean there aren't health challenges.
Mhm.
The congenital sort of heart conditions that lots of people with Down syndrome have, do need to be addressed. But once given, the opportunity to have that, you can see the beauty of life, right out in front of people. So I think that's the big misconception and the big myth, that Down syndrome people are not able to do things. And I guess it probably relates to disability generally, doesn't it, Aisha? The people define disabled people in terms of the limitations that they have. They can't do this, can't do that. They're going to struggle with this, and all that, the rest of it. And you just got to knock that on the head, and be a positive example, really, and say, actually, no, that's nonsense. And the fact that you used to say we've got Oscar winners, that we've got writers, that we've got people, it just shows that it is nonsense. I think one of the challenges is always going to be, and this was always one of them going when I was growing up, was if somebody found a cure for Down syndrome, and cured in very inverted commas here, and you sort of thought, what does that mean? It's one of those things. I don't know what current research, for example, may look like that maybe does look and investigate this cure for Down syndrome. And you're thinking, oh my word, what does that mean? Is that self-defining in itself that Down syndrome is seen as a problem? And all those aspects are there as well. So, but I think the big myths and misconceptions are about what people can achieve, because when people are given the opportunity, they can achieve anything really.
Absolutely. So I relate to some of that in my context as well. So having a physical disability from birth, being having told I wouldn't be able to study, I wouldn't be able to work, go on in life. But you know me, Julian, I've worked. I've had quite a few health challenges, but I try not to let that stop me in doing what I want to do. And
I think that's the thing. I can remember, and I know we're coming towards the end, Aisha, but I'd just like to tell this story that Danny, when when we knew he was dying, we knew his heart was failing. He was in a hospital bed, and a friend of my mum's came with her little boy, and her little boy was about 6 or 7 years old. And Danny at the time was struggling with his breathing, was obviously in a lot of pain. And when this little boy came and saw Danny in his hospital bed, Danny he got quite emotional and he started coughing and he looked a bit of a sight, to be fair. And the first thing he did once he'd recovered himself was to apologise to this young little lad. He said, "I hope I didn't scare you. I'm a bit like this at the minute." Because I thought, wow, somebody who we don't know whether he knew he was dying. That's one of the big dilemmas that we had. Do we tell him that his heart is failing, that he's going to die? How do you have that conversation? We didn't. We didn't go there. But I think Danny probably knew. And to think of the impact of his bad health condition on a 6 and 7-year-old boy who was coming to see him was just amazing. And that was Danny in a nutshell. And that's what I take from it: the sort of strength and the compassion and the humanity involved in that. And that's always been an inspiration for me. And I think that's what we like to hope. From Danny's death comes inspiration, and from
absolutely,
Danny's life comes inspiration as well.
exactly. Danny is already an inspiration for me and many others as well. A lot of key hidden messages, what Julian said about his brother, his life. A lot of takeaways in the radio show as well of how to live your life, how to overcome certain challenges. Fortunately, we're coming to the end of our show, and I'd like to thank Julian for joining us today, talking about a topic that's very raw and it's something that you've not spoken about, but have given me an opportunity to use my platform to share your story as well, and I'm sure my viewers have really enjoyed listening to the story and taking away. Please do check out Julian's Facebook group for updates on his the book that's coming out, or anything about Down syndrome. Or if you're listening on the radio, then simply search Julian's Facebook name. Before we go, I'd like to say please do tune back in onto my last show, unfortunately, so you're going to miss me, I hope, or maybe not. On the 6th of August at 3 p.m. with Umayma Dakri, a good friend of mine. You may have all heard of her through and what she does. She's known as disability.living on Instagram and has campaigned for hashtag Don't Curb the Access. I don't need to say more because you know what Don't Curb the Access is, and hopefully her show you'll be able to relate if you have a physical disability, or you may learn to not curb the access. So thank you once again, Julian.
You're very welcome.
Sorry. I hope today wasn't so overwhelming for you, but
No, it's really nice. It's always good to chat with you, Aisha. It's like we're just having a conversation, aren't we? It's fantastic.
we do need to meet one-on-one, have a good catch up.
Absolutely.
Seeing each other. But thank you all for joining in, for sending in your lovely messages, and I do hope you join me back in with Mayma on my last show on the 6th of August. Till then, I hope you all have a pleasant, dull Sunday ahead for the week coming. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.